So thanks very much for joining us today. This is our annual Lunch and Learn as we get ready for annual performance reports due this summer, and this is what we call a merit year, where there's a full review for all faculty and review for kind of assessment of your work against a merit ranking. So I want to offer information for those who are going through the process for the first time, but we often also have folks joining us who have been through the process before and just want to hear kind of what's new and different, because every year it seems that we're tweaking and tuning process a little bit as well to organize and figure out how to help you prepare your materials and appreciate what is involved for the reviewers so that you can put your work in the best light. Today helping us, we've got our HR advisor, Elena Samalova. Very good. Pausing on the name. Elena is a key contact for us with HR, and she's involved in academic processes, as is Lelia Moran. As you're going to see, my bottom line is contact Lelia Moran for all things related to APRs. You can see her name coming up repeatedly as we walk through the conversation this morning. So what I'd like to do is just talk to you about what is the annual performance report and how does it fit in the process that we go through as part of our peer review and merit assessment. So please do throw out questions as we go. Can you see that okay? I know this room isn't great. You want me to turn down lights for the front? Nobody will go to sleep, I'm sure. This is so exciting. What does that do for videotaping? Is that?
It's not good.
It's not good. Okay. Part of the idea here is that we will post the videotape and the PowerPoint slides on the intranet. So you should be able to access them afterwards. If you can't quite see it, come on forward. See if you can get a little closer to the screen. That would be great. Essentially what annual performance reports are intended to do is for each of us to have an opportunity to reflect on the year, to think about our accomplishments in the year, our challenges, our personal goals, developing as faculty members, and to participate in a process of peer review and feedback that helps us to become better at what we do. So some folks are on a path toward tenure and promotion. Some are at various different points in that cycle. But the whole notion of peer review is really kind of a standard expectation in academic life, that we subject our scholarship and our work to review by our colleagues. And one of the reasons we do that is not just to be critiqued, but to grow and to learn over time. So that's very much part of the intent of the annual performance reporting process. As I was mentioning, 2017 is a reporting year for everybody in the faculty, and the only people who are exempted from the requirement to provide an annual report to the university are people who are hired on sessional contracts. So if you're a sessional appointee, you're not required to submit an annual performance report. And if you're recently appointed, if you're appointed just in the few months leading up to the end of the academic year at the end of June, you're not required to provide an annual performance report in the current year. These reports are due July 15th. Last year's, mostly they've been July 1st, so we tried to give you a couple weeks grace into the summer as people are trying to escape on holidays and people are busy wrapping up their academic years. To have until July 15th to provide those reports to the Dean's office. And the reporting period that you're looking at when you're providing your annual report is the past 2 years. So the full merit assessment happens every 2 years. So the reporting period is actually July 15th, 2015 to June 30th, 2017. When we look at the overall process, the big steps along the path, this is kind of the roadmap that we're going to break down a bit in more detail. Typically, we of course start with the faculty member gathering data and hopefully updating your CV throughout the year, because that sure helps make it easier when you go to do the online APR template on PeopleSoft. The idea is that you finish that process, completing the online APR and gathering your supporting materials. There's the first time Lelia's name shows up, to Lelia Moran by July 15th. And then in the weeks that follow that, those reports are all reviewed by the Associate Dean. So typically Shelley Raffin, who's our Associate Dean Graduate Programs, will review files for the professoriate rank faculty, and Graham McCaffrey reviews files for the instructor rank faculty. And their job is to provide you with a feedback letter, typically received by you sometime in September. And there's specific timelines mapped out against this. This is pretty high level in terms of process, but the idea behind the feedback letter is they offer you a summary of their appraisal of your work, and they offer you their assessment in terms of the merit increment that they are assigning for your work. Their recommendation for a merit increment then goes forward to a faculty merit committee. So there's a committee of peers elected within the faculty. We'll talk about the constitution of that committee, but they will meet in October, November time frame roughly, and they review all of the faculty files and the Associate Dean's recommendations for merit assessment, and they make final adjustments and recommendations regarding the merit to be assigned. So the Associate Dean's recommendation has kind of a second vetting for the merit increment at committee. And then the committee recommendations come to the dean, and I have an opportunity then, not until the end of the year essentially, to offer you a feedback letter so that you hear what the final results were from the increment to be assigned for from the committee and from the deans. Because I have opportunity to raise it or lower it. I usually take the recommendation of the committee unless there's some other mitigating circumstance that we would have conversations about at committee as well. So the merit increment is applied in December after it's gone through this whole process, but it takes effect July 1. So there is a salary adjustment that goes back to your July 1 time frame and catches you up around the merit salary impact. And so I want people to appreciate kind of what that means, because I think aside from preparing the APR report, lots of people don't understand how does that merit system work. Is that interesting to you folks to just try to have a sense of that as well? Basically, the Faculty of Nursing receives an increment pool, and it's based on the number of people that we have in the faculty, part-time and full-time, tenured and tenure track and limited term. And from that pool, the associate deans and the merit committee have to make an assessment and assign an increment to each individual faculty member. And when you come forward, you're compared to other faculty members with comparable responsibilities. So if you're primarily a nursing instructor doing clinical teaching, you'll be compared to nursing instructors who are doing primarily that kind of work. Tenured and tenure track faculty members who have more responsibilities for scholarship are compared against each other. Senior instructors are compared against each other, and same thing in the professoriate ranks. Assistant profs compared within their rank, associate and full professor. So this gets confusing for people because sometimes in a particular year there's not very many people that are getting really high increments, so everybody does better in that year. And then the next year there's high flyers, and it's a zero-sum game. So it means that overall, you might have done the same work, but the next year your merit increment isn't quite the same. And that's really confusing for people to make sense of in the long game. But essentially what happens is the associate deans make that first merit recommendation, it goes to committee, and the committee has to come to agreement, or at least a majority vote on what the merit increment would be for the individual. And then you can see there the normal kind of breakdown of what the merit points actually mean. So 0 is unsatisfactory, nobody wants a 0, and it's very rare that people are assigned a 0 as well. 0.4 is the merit that would be assigned for someone who's doing kind of minimal contribution for career progression. So their work is not viewed as unsatisfactory, but as kind of not at meritorious level. Anything between 0.6 and 1.0 is considered to be meritorious work. And then if people are being assigned merit increments of 1.2 or greater, for some reason they're doing work that is viewed as exceptionally meritorious in comparison to others in their rank. And so how this translates to your pay scale is where people often also don't understand how does merit work. And it took me a long time as a faculty member to realize, what is that column on the right-hand side? This is straight from the collective agreement. This is the pay grid. You can see the increment value of 1.0 That's the merit increment that's being reflected in that far column. And so if you're an instructor and you receive a 1.0, I'll do my Vanna game here, a 1.0, you would get $1,900 added to your base salary, right? So it is a salary adjustment. It's great in that it does go to your base. It's not just a one-time assessment. And so in my early years as an academic, I used to say, stop fighting about 1.0 versus 1.2 because it's really not that much money. It's the equivalent of a latte a week or something it's not, in some ways, but it is significant in that over time, if you're consistently at the top end of the field, if you're consistently earning 1.2 or 1.4, your salary, your base salary will escalate faster than if you're earning 0.6 or 0.8. So any questions about that piece? Because I find this is the most confusing part for people when they're trying to figure out what's the big deal about. So far, so good? Should we talk about how you do your performance report? Where to get there? Okay. How many of you are familiar with the My UFC portal? I know that we've got people who've been here for varying lengths of time. Okay, so everybody knows how to find My UFC portal. So that is where the PeopleSoft system is for accessing your academic performance report. And you might not be able to see it here, but there is actually a link that says Academic Performance Report if you go in under All About Me. I'm just going to take you into a few slides that reflect my past academic performance reports so you can see how to get there. When you get into that function, in this top corner it says that fill the current year report. That's where you want to go. It's right there at the top of the slide. You can go look at the previous year's reports, but for starters, just go there and figure out what's on the next screen, because that's what's really important and going to help you to walk through the process. What you will find is that on some of the screens that you're going to walk through when you get into that function, some of them are already populated. Like your teaching assignments that were formally assigned through the system will automatically be populated. Some of your background information, like in this case, my previous degrees, right? They're coming off PeopleSoft somewhere in HR and being pulled into here. One of the things to be aware of is that sometimes the information that's populated isn't correct, right? So there's a couple of ways that you can try to have them corrected. So in most screens, you'll find a report error button, and that will link you to a process where at least you can trigger the system to say, somebody needs to pay attention to this for whatever reason. It doesn't reflect my actual teaching, or it doesn't reflect my actual profile data. And sometimes people either run out of time and the error hasn't been corrected when they're ready to submit their materials. If that should happen to you and there's an error that you want to make sure that the reviewers are have on the radar screen, just include a note about any errors at the beginning of your report, so that if there's inaccuracies, they're highlighted rather than taken for fact all the way through. So when you get into this function, this notion of generating your report, each of these is a clickable data field with different kinds of information that's either populated or that you're going to update. So you just need to walk right through each of these fields, and where there's modifiable information, you will enter information. Often it's from your CV. Some of it is contextual information, but this is an example of U of C credit courses. This is a field or a screen that was populated for my teaching assignment that year, and it just lists the courses, the name of the class, and basically the enrollment for the class. So some of that is automatically pulled down for you. So basically you're just going to walk through all of these background pieces. There's room for you to enter scholarly activity, whether it's publications and presentations or funded projects, funded research, to identify other works in progress, other kinds of scholarly activities. And as you go into each of these, there's data entry screens that you just walk through and add the information as it helps you to describe the work that you're doing. I'm going to show you a couple more screens, but I think what I want to emphasize in putting the report together, it really is your responsibility to make sure that everything on this report is accurate. So what you provide to the committee is what they have to work with when they're reviewing your work. And so, so you want to make sure that you can fully contextualize the fields that you're entering. I've mentioned materials that's automatically transferred to your report. In some sections, how many of you will be doing this for the second time or third time? Okay, so lots of you will have entered this information previously. Your job is to go back and remove the data that's old as well. So if it doesn't pertain to this reporting period, you need to delete old information. Okay, so that's really important. Yeah, Megan.
And would that be from 2015 to 16? Like, would you?
So for instructors who did a report last year, you can leave it in. So just remember the reporting period, right? It's July 1, 2015 to June 30th, 2017. So everything that's listed on any of the screens that you're walking your way through should be within that time window.
So you only need it once, even though you're doing it in both years?
That's right.
Okay.
Right. So if you entered it for your report last year, you would leave it and include it alongside new information for the second year of the reporting period. Great question. Yeah, really important.
Just so I understand, so that will come up when you're in those screens? That one
Yes.
you did last year?
Yes, right. If you entered it last year, it will still be there. So for example, if you had a research award that's 2 years old, some of your research, that's maybe not a good example, some of your research information will also be pulled forward if it's on file with the research office. But if there's smaller grants, foundation grants, or other project awards, you might have to be entering some of those in. If they're outside that reporting window, you need to delete them. So one of the things that really frustrates reviewers is, files that are not accurate for the reporting period, because sometimes it looks like people are trying to pad their file, that it looks like people are trying to make it look like more than it is. And these reviewers will go through dozens of files. It's a great privilege for them because they see the good work that people are doing in the faculty, but it is a heck of a heavy workload committee. So a clean file will always be appraised better than one that looks sloppy and like it hasn't been well thought through in putting it together. So, so this first step, verify that the information continues to be relevant for the current reporting year, is Megan's question. And then go ahead and delete outdated information that's no longer appropriate. Often that's around publications and presentations that were outside the reporting period, projects that have been completed in previous years, or the other big one for professoriate folks is graduate students who have finished and are no longer on your supervisory workload or caseload as well, committees that are no longer current. Okay, so make sure that it's up to date, that it reflects the current year. And this is just an example of a screen that shows the kinds of tools that are available to you to, in this instance, provide information about external committees. So if you want to add a new committee that doesn't get pulled forward from your last year's report, you go add new, there's a button for that. If there's some of these that I should be deleting because I'm no longer on those committees, wow, look at this, 2006. I haven't updated this for a while. This is an old slide. So there's a little trash can. You would just go delete, take out the ones that are no longer current. If you want to change anything in terms of, the role or the period, there's a little edit button there. So you just kind of walk through each one, make sure it's current, and there's a few variations on a theme in terms of what the slide actually looks like, depending on what the topic is that's being reported. This is one that has more text fields for you to add information. So here, this is on external committees. This would be down under service. So this is towards the tail end of this menu on the left-hand side. So you would just type in your role, the organization or committee. Brief comments, if there's, people will often use comment fields to reflect the significance of the time commitment, or how heavy the workload was, or major achievements maybe from that role on that external committee. You can see here start and end dates for the time frame, and then the all-important always save button at the bottom. Save as you go on every screen for sure. Mm-hmm.
So if the start date was, for example, years before the time period,
Right.
you should still put the July 1st, 2015.
If you've been serving on this committee for 10 years,
Yeah.
it's okay for the start date to be outside that window as long as the activity is still reflected within the reporting period. Yeah. Yeah, don't leave it off just because you're continuing to do it and it started before this reporting period. Make sure you include everything that you've been working on in the current reporting period. Is there another question? Yeah,
So
Margarita.
if it is current, like if you're still participating in a committee, as an end date, would you put the end of the reporting period?
So you might be elected, for example, for faculty committees, you might be elected to a position that's a 3-year term and it's not going to expire until June next year. You should put June next year in the end date, right? So it shows, but it's current it's active in the current reporting period. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that you can put something other than numerics in this field. You could try putting ongoing in there, and if it doesn't take it, put a date that is beyond the current. Like if you expect that you'll be serving on that committee next year as well, use next year's date to reflect that it will extend beyond the current reporting period. That's true. You could reflect that in the comment section. Yeah. Oh my, that's big print. So where you can insert qualitative text, that's an opportunity for you to offer some brief comments so that the reviewer can appreciate something important about the entry that you've been making, because in lots of these data entry options that run down that left-hand screen in that menu, there are data entry boxes that are open text boxes. And so the example, reporting of service commitments, if you're serving as a chair or a lead on a certain aspect of a working group of a committee, don't hesitate to reflect that. It says something that you've stepped up to leadership in a different way than if you're a member on a committee, so make sure that your contribution is reflected. If there are particular things that the committee worked on that was like a big push to get something done in that year, you can comment on that in the reporting qualitative comments. And if either the work of the committee or your personal contribution was somehow noteworthy, use those data boxes to reflect that. Yeah?
What about committees that were on by virtue of being on faculty? Do they get reported or are they assumed?
I think that's at your discretion. If there's, like the main one would be all tenure track and limited term appointees, our nursing council, or graduate program committee. You should mention for sure, because professoriate are automatically on that committee, but other faculty at the instructor rank wouldn't be, right? So I think that I think it's important to reflect all of the committees that you're involved in. I think probably council is the only one that everybody is automatically involved in, but it's fine to reflect that here as well. It's really important to the reviewers that that when they look at your report, that they only see things identified once, right? So if you're not sure where to put something, should it go in this section or another section, just pick one. Right, pick whichever one you think is best for the information that's being requested, because otherwise, again, sometimes the reviewers think that you're trying to make it look like there's more there than there is if you're putting it in 3 sections, for example. So just put it in that one area that you think it most fits. I'm going to show you a screen that has a text box for you to add a paragraph, for example, about highlights of the year. And those boxes are intended to be highlights, not an essay, right? Sometimes people will type 2 pages of text into those boxes, and trust me, it does not serve you well with the reviewers. because often people end up just listing and pointing to things that they've already identified elsewhere in the report. If there are some aspects of things that you've entered elsewhere in the report that for some reason you think are really notable accomplishments for that reporting period, yes, find a way to concisely comment on them, but think hard about what do you want the reviewers to notice, right? Of all of the things that are in that annual performance report, what are the things that you want them to notice? And typically in those comment boxes, you wouldn't exceed 250 to 300 words. It's intended to be a paragraph, not a cover letter explaining everything that you've done. And that highlights of the year is one of the final boxes for you to enter at the bottom of this menu. And you can see here, I think that there's a bar that you can pull down for teaching highlights, for research highlights, or for overall highlights. There's a few different pull downs on this top menu thing, and then you just have a big text box, but don't take that as liberty to write a novel, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Would you do one for teaching and one for research?
You could if you had something notable that you wanted them to recognize in your teaching. If you got, if there was something, supposing that somewhere else you were able to report on a teaching award that you got, and there was something important about that award that you wanted them to know, yeah, a comment here is fine. Those are exceptional things, or most meaningful things that you want the reviewer to be aware of. People are often challenged to understand how we think about merit in relation to publications. And essentially, the way that the actual recognition in terms of the merit is assigned for publications is in the year that you have them published. So once they're assigned a publication year, that's the year when it gets considered for meritorious recognition in terms of increment value. If you do have other publications that are in press or submitted or even in development, there are ways that you can reflect that in the APR report, and please do include all of them because it shows work that's coming. You know, you might have only 1 or 2 publications or presentations for a year, but there's 4 other ones that you're just waiting to come out, and you've done the work and it's coming. It's helpful for the reviewers to see that there's a pattern of activity that is useful. So report all new publications and presentations, but remove publications from previous years that land outside the reporting period. I still think this is contentious because if the reporting period is, for example, 15-16, how would it, and something was published in January of 2015, there's still an overlap window. But anyway, think about the year that they're published and the reporting period and do your best to fairly indicate it in the appropriate year. And again, manuscripts or works that have not yet been submitted for review can be included. There's ways to reflect that as works in progress. So when you get to the end of this PeopleSoft report, one of the most important things that you do is that you follow this menu all the way down to the bottom, past the highlights, to this little section here that says Administration. Because what you need to do, you can view your report before you finalize it and submit it, but you need to go down to the very last item to authorize your report. You have to go into that last function, and it has a couple more clicks for you to actually submit your report. So in terms of the online system, it doesn't know that you're completely finished entering your data until you go down and authorize your report. And then it gives you a screen as well that lets you print off a copy. Unfortunately, I don't believe that it lets you print a PDF to file, right? So I think you have to print a hard copy, which you're probably well advised to do, to keep a copy for yourself. But you need to send to Lelia a PDF copy that is the printout from all of this data entry. Okay, so far so good? Everybody's with me? Then, that was step 1. Okay, the next step is to gather all of the materials that support the achievements that are cited in your annual performance report. So it's a bit of an evidentiary process. So if you had publications that went to print, you would include the front page of that publication, just the abstract, not the whole article, but just so you can show these were the publications that came through. If you had abstracts that you presented, either papers or posters at conferences, again, submitting the abstract or the acceptance note that you received, usually by email these days, indicating that your abstract submission was accepted. So just the first page of those materials is all you need for articles, chapters, reported as published and impressed. Reviewers are always interested in understanding whether works were going through a peer review process or whether it was invited, and I think in some of the pull-down menus there's ways to distinguish that on the annual performance report. But certainly if you're invited to do keynote address, the documentation inviting you to do keynote is honorific, right? If someone's seeking you out to do a keynote, it means you have some expertise that they want to hear from you in particular. So you can include those letters or emails of invitation to serve as keynotes or plenaries. If you've received new funded grants or projects, you should submit the first page or the acknowledgement page indicating that you have been a recipient of a competitive award process. If that letter of notification also includes feedback that offers kind of appraisal of your submission in relation to the rest of the pool from which it was selected, sometimes again it's honorific, it shows the peer review that others have done of your work, so people will often include that full funding letter as kind of evidence of the quality of the work that they have been doing. For all of us, there is an expectation to include teaching evaluation materials. We're required to show effectiveness of teaching practice, and so this can be done in a number of different ways. Normally, if you're teaching larger classes where there's sufficient numbers of students to warrant the university's USRI evaluation, just the first page of that summary is really all that's useful for the purposes of the APR, because it just has that scale in the graph in the top right-hand corner, and it says how many times you've taught the course and the response rate. So just that first page from the USRI feedback. The Faculty of Nursing instructor evaluations, again, there's another vehicle for you to demonstrate the feedback that you have received on instructor evaluations. And sometimes people will have undergone some kind of peer review process where they'll have another colleague come into their classroom and offer them some formal tips around their assessment of some aspect of their teaching that they're working on. Those kinds of formal peer review letters are absolutely welcomed as part of this review. I always, sometimes people completely omit providing evidence of teaching effectiveness, and whether you teach in the professoriate rank or in the instructor rank, it's viewed as a red flag. Like, why aren't they providing their teaching evaluations? Makes people think that there's something wrong with their teaching evaluations. And I hope that people will trust that all of us receive teaching evaluations with a range of positive and negative support from students over time, and what the students actually offered for comment and feedback, I mean, that's important, but I think that if you have feedback that you've received that you've been working on that have made you think about your progression as a teacher, or have prompted you to develop other aspects of your teaching, talk about that in your highlights section. Right? So contextualize your teaching evaluations. If you have any of those kinds of concerns, or even if you're, you've got glowing teaching evaluations, but you've been working really hard, taking courses from the Taylor Institute and doing work that really is helping you to develop as an academic, and you want to comment on that, write about that in your highlights section. But please provide some evidence of teaching effectiveness, because it just raises red flags all over the place if they're completely absent. It makes it very difficult for merit to be assigned, frankly, if your main responsibilities are teaching and there's no evidence of teaching effectiveness. You'll hear from the associate deans saying, "Where's your stuff? We're stuck," right? And for those of you who might have been on a sabbatical leave, or what we now call research and scholarly leave during that reporting period, your report from that leave should also be included as part of your submission in those appended materials. So typically, let's just see what this next slide says. Oh yes, things not to include. Sometimes we get nice notes of thanks from students or from colleagues. And often, if they're just vouching for you as being a good person or a nice teacher, like those don't substantively add to the appraisal of your work. So be careful about those other kinds of things that you might include. And similarly, if you just go to another colleague and say, you know, I need some feedback to include in my teaching evaluation. If it's, again, not specifically done in the context of some kind of peer review process, it's usually not regarded as particularly rigorous. So be careful about the extra things that you include. Be mindful if there's something that is important for you to include. Again, you might explain in one of those text boxes why you've included that in your package of supporting materials. So you're getting the gist that there's kind of these chunks of supporting materials that substantiate what you've provided in your annual performance report. So basically, what we need for you to provide as your final submission is a series of 3 or 4 PDF files, and they go to Lelia Moran, lelia.moran@ucalgary.ca. It's on your next slide or two as well, how to provide that to her. So what we need you to do is to have a PDF made of your annual performance report that comes off the system, off the PeopleSoft system, and then a separate PDF file for each little bundle of your supporting materials related to teaching, related to research or scholarly works, and if there's things that you're providing in relation to your service, your committee work, either internally or externally, professional association work, if there's any of that kind of supporting material, that would be your final PDF file. So we need you to send up to 4 files to Lelia. In years past, sometimes people have done individual PDFs of all of their individual supporting documents, and sometimes that's 25 files. So a reviewer has to go in and open 25 files to review your work. So it's, again, trying to make the process work as smoothly as possible, hopefully for you, but also for the reviewers. And I thought there was something else I was going to say about that. It might be on the very last slide yet. So again, deadline to provide the materials is July 15th. Up to 4 files to Lelia. You've got her email address there. In years past, if you've submitted, how many of you have submitted in years past where you used the online document management system, the OADM? Not. Okay, we are not using that system. Elena will hear. I've ranted many times with HR. It's a document management system that has, in our experience, not worked very well for us. So we're not using it this year at all. So please don't fuss about OADM at all. There will be a set of written instructions coming out that will also emphasize that as part of the process. Well, this isn't quite in the sequence that I thought it might be. Hang on, we'll come back to this. Okay, maybe I'll just walk through this just so I don't forget to come back to it. In terms of preparing your materials, I think one of the hottest tips is just keep your CV up to date all year, right? As you're getting publications or presentations or new committees that you're working on, keep your CV current. And then mostly you just have to kind of make sure that you're taking stuff from the reporting period and making sure that it shows up on that PeopleSoft APR reporting system. The other thing that I've done over the years that has just really worked well for me is just keep a portfolio file that you can add documents to all year that you think, maybe this is a supporting material that I will want to include in my next annual performance report. And frankly, you will use that for tenure and promotion and other things. So just start collecting things that you can always weed through them later and decide if you want to include them or not, but start gathering them throughout the year. This is what I wanted to talk about. So when you've got those supporting materials kind of gathered into their little bundles of teaching related or scholarship related, scholarly work related or service related, It's totally fair game to you for you to ask your administrative assistant for some help to scan those into separate PDF documents for you, so you don't have to do all of the handling and preparing the files that you need to submit. But just remember that even though you're asking your admin assistant to organize your work in some way, you are still ultimately accountable for the quality and the organization of whatever ends up being handed in. So do ask for help where you think it's appropriate for your admin assistant to do some work for you. Most people prefer to do their own PeopleSoft online data entry piece that tends to be a bit more nitty-gritty, and you get reminded of things while you're doing that. But in terms of getting the materials, the supporting documents ready, ask for help where you can. And hopefully the whole process really helps you to think about your progress over the year and to reflect on where you want to go, what were your accomplishments, and where do you want to head next. So the way that those documents end up being handled, just for people to know, sometimes people are sensitive. They've got teaching evaluations. They've got material that they would prefer be kept confidential in some ways for whatever reasons. And I just want to assure you that your admin assistant is obviously a handler, so don't give her anything to work with that you don't want them to know about. But other than that, when Lelia gets those 4 PDF files, what she does with them is she posts them on a D2L site, and that website can only be accessed by the associate deans and by the members of the faculty merit committee. So I chair that committee. I also see those documents, but access to those materials is limited. And the committee members agree, as we launch each year into the work that we do together, that everything that we talk about at that table stays in the room in perpetuity. The discussion of this committee is intended to be wholly confidential because we're assessing people's work, and we know that matters a lot to people. And we're comparing work that people are doing against each other. And so we don't want those conversations to go anywhere else. And committee members are required to declare actual or perceived conflicts of interest, because we sometimes have not only collegial relationships, some of which are stronger than others, but we also sometimes have personal relationships. Sometimes we're related to other people in the faculty. Sometimes people have been supervised by another faculty member, or they are supervising another faculty member. So all of those kinds of things we have people declare up front for transparency's sake. And in fact, as we get closer to convening this committee, we do also circulate the list of actual members on the committee. So if for some reason there's someone on the committee that for whatever reason you've had a scrap with, like really, and you're worried about how they will appraise your work at the table, or whether they can appraise you fairly, you can ask for that person to be recused from consideration of your file, right? So there's lots of checks and balances in the system. We'll try to keep you posted and informed about those as the system goes through the process, but just to be aware of that as well, if that should be, for whatever reason, troubling you. We know that sometimes our worlds are complicated. And then for the members of the committee, when we do deliberate in terms of who's on the committee and how we work, I chair the committee and I only vote to break a tie, right? So mostly the will of the committee is what goes forward to a minuted motion. The members on that committee are 3 elected members of the faculty, typically serving 3-year staggered terms. I went and looked at our membership list, and there's no names populated on it right now. So I'm not sure what that means, but there will be positions on this committee that will come up in the next month on our faculty elections, right? So we try to make sure that on this committee there are people from various ranks and positions across the faculty. 2 of the faculty members on this committee have to be tenured. So 2 of the 3. The Associate Dean graduate programs and undergraduate programs are voting members. There are student representatives who are voting members as well, typically at least 1, or usually 1, either graduate or undergraduate, and we work with the Undergrad Nursing Society or the Graduate Students Nursing Association to get representatives on that committee. Student perspectives are really helpful. Sometimes, we're hotly debating work, and people and students remind us about what's important in terms of their worlds as well. And then there's also a representative of the of TUCFA, the Faculty Association, present as a participating member, but non-voting member of the committee. And we typically also have an HR observer there as well, non-voting. But between TUCFA and our HR rep, they keep us honest to process and make sure that if there's any things we should have on our radar screen regarding process, that we're paying attention to that as well. So, long song and dance. Other questions? Yeah, Linda.
Okay, so as far as supporting documentation, where I submitted a renewal letter last year and a teaching dossier, would those things be included, or just highlight the information from?
You would draw selectively from those materials.
From those materials.
Right, so you should have a head start because you have a bundle of materials to pull from. But again, just highlighting those materials from that actual reporting period. Yeah. So sorry, for the purpose of the tape, the question was, what about the materials that I've done for my teaching dossier or a previous submission for tenure and promotion? Yeah, use them selectively.
And so I wouldn't include the letter that I received renewal or anything like that in?
No, because we would have that information basically as kind of start information, whether you're tenured and what your rank is, and how many, actually even how many years that you've been in your rank is one of the things that we look at, because we don't want to be comparing someone who's been an instructor with us for a year or two against an instructor who's maybe in year 4 or 5. We would expect perhaps different things from people at different trajectory.
So the PDF files that were submitted last year, that you still need to include some of those into this, is that correct?
Yes, if you reported for a 1-year period last year because you're pre-tenure, yes.
So, so just look at it as this is a 2-year period.
Yep.
Kind of forget what was done last year, or use some of it. But
Yes.
still.
So if you provided materials last year, if you're pre-tenure and you had documentation that for whatever reason you included last year as a PDF file, that needs to be combined into a larger PDF with other materials relevant to either teaching, research and scholarship, or service. Yeah, but absolutely recycle materials that are relevant for that reporting period. Yeah. Make sense? Yeah.
So even the instructor evaluation documents, everything we submitted for the 2015, 2016, we're not submitting.
Right, so if you have documents, effectiveness of teaching, right, USRIs or course instructor evaluations that you submitted last year, absolutely bring them forward to be part of the PDF around teaching for the current submission. Yeah, Megan, and then I'll come right back.
Sure, I have 2 questions. If you're workloaded for project work, where would that information go? Because it won't show up in your teaching.
Right, okay. This is a really important question. So if you're workloaded for project work, how do you reflect that? Okay, so what you do is you look for in one of those items on the menu where there's many different ways where it will give you opportunity to talk about projects and other unfunded scholarly works, whatever that might be. Can you give an example of the project work?
I'm working on looking at the learner outcomes and sort of revising our evaluation for us. And
Right.
I'm workloaded for that.
Right. So in the section on teaching, find a way to show that and indicate that you were workloaded for it, and comment on it for sure. So that, because if you don't comment on it, people won't appreciate what you've been doing either, right? And often those are leadership things that you're doing to help us clean up curriculum or advance our curriculum in some ways, or curriculum development or evolution kinds of things. Speak to those for sure with enough comment that it makes sense what it was that you were asked to do and then what you did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I have one more.
Okay.
Could you provide a couple examples of service, just so I know what goes in that section?
Yeah, so service is your participation on any faculty or university committees, or contributions that you're making to clinical professional associations outside. You might be serving on committees for Alberta Health Services. So internal service is usually considered to be internal to the faculty or the university. So for example, our instructors work on teams around the courses that they're teaching in a particular semester. If you're meeting with those folks, is it every Monday or every other Monday, right? That's committee work, that's group work that you're doing in support of teaching. So that's service, right? That's part of raising the bar on the quality of what's happening in teaching and learning. So for most instructors struggle with I either haven't been here long enough to serve on university committees or not sure, but include even those, they might not be elected committees, but they're working groups that you're involved in. That's service. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Gudrun.
So I know you said the USRI. I'm a bit unclear about the student comments that come along with the USRI.
Uh-huh.
Do we include those? Are we selective? Because there's a wide range.
Right.
of comments.
Okay. So the question is about USRIs and textual comments that students might offer as part of those submissions. So again, you have room for discretion about how much comments you want to include. You might, depending on your teaching loads, and for the most part, for the annual performance report, it's usually not too much, even if you were teaching 2, 3, 4 courses, to include their full commentary. Sometimes if you worry what people might think if you're sampling somehow, right? It's not reflective of the full feedback that you would have received. Put in the whole sample, and again, talk about it in your highlight section or some other qualitative field that lets you speak to your teaching evaluations. Sorry?
So contextual.
Contextualize it, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Does that help? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I was in Doha in the fall.
Ah, thank you. Yes.
But I did not get any instructor evaluation.
Right.
So I basically have nothing to show for my fall 2016 semester.
Right.
Do I just mention that?
Yes.
Okay.
Make sure that you include that in a comment field somewhere in that teaching section. And so that would be an example of something that was part of your assigned workload, but not a course that's going to populate from the system, right? So you'll find a way to enter that as a specific additional teaching kind of item and indicate that you did not have formal teaching evaluations from that. What you should think about if you go back to Doha, again, or have another kind of experience like that where there isn't formal teaching evaluations, is find ways to evaluate your teaching, right? In everything that we do, we should be looking for student input, student feedback, and talk about the ways that you solicit and incorporate student feedback, regardless of whether you're required to do it for end of semester teaching input from students, or just how you do that all along. And then you can include, like maybe you do just kind of a dashboard at the middle of the semester or at a few points during the semester where you're asking students even what's working well, what should we start doing, what we should stop doing.
Informal temperature checks.
Yeah.
I've done that, but
So-
when you're with the students for 4 weeks at a time.
Yes.
It's a little tricky.
But still, think about what kind of feedback do you need to improve the ways that you can support them while you're there. And sometimes it's just a little mini questionnaire of some sort, or you just ask them to send you feedback. It's better to have some of that kind of feedback, even if it's self-generated in some ways, than to have none, right? Because you can bring that forward as you're going through tenure and promotion processes as well. That's all demonstrating teaching effectiveness. And it's always, what we're looking for there always is, how are people learning from their teaching? How are people growing their teaching? How is it getting more sophisticated? Because they're thinking about, how am I doing in my teaching, right? So find ways to incorporate it, even if you're generating the ways to corroborate it. It's a great question, yeah.
Okay, to follow up on that question, because I was in 599 and there's 12 or less students, so there's not a USRI.
Right.
Where did you say to mention that? Or?
Yep, so the question is in a small group section like Nursing 599, where there's less than 12 students, it doesn't trigger a USRI evaluation. Again, I would encourage you to find ways to get student feedback throughout the semester, right? Yeah, for future,
Yeah.
right? For future, so that you've got some kind of feedback that you can document. And I think are there not course evaluations, the nursing course by course instructor and course evaluations. Yeah, Amy, yes?
Yeah, we both have, you have both your faculty instructor and your course.
Okay.
Evaluation.
So those are formal evaluations that the faculty collects from students that
Right.
you would get copies of that
Yeah.
you could include.
But where do you put that in the report?
So it should show up as part of your assigned teaching.
Okay,
It should pull that in.
okay.
And if it doesn't, there's a field that says other, I think it's other assigned teaching or other there's credit and non-credit. There's boxes where you can kind of fine tune and modify. So use the system to best reflect what you need to enter. Margarita, yeah.
For service, do you also include your participation in other meetings besides the teaching group, like the Monday meetings with the teaching?
Right. So the question is about service again. So what's the example that you're curious about?
Committee of the whole, meetings like that, or lunch and talks that have
Ah.
been offered by the faculty.
Right. So committee of the whole are committee meetings where there's some kind of topical issue that people are gathering to explore together or problem solve together. So absolutely include if there's samples of those that you've attended. And lunch and learns, there's I believe there's data entry that helps you track kind of professional development things as well. And so it could go under that kind of category. So in the handout that I gave you, it doesn't exhaustively have all of the details on the PeopleSoft APR thing. So you just need to get in there and poke around a bit to see the different formats. Yeah, Dave.
For decanal appointments, where would they normally be?
For
Decanal appointments?
decanal appointments to committees. Yeah, it's still, you're serving on a committee at the request of the dean, right? So absolutely just identify that as a service commitment, and you might comment that you're the decanal representative on the committee. It really doesn't elevate your status in any way or change the role that you would do there. But some committees have both elected members and opportunity to balance the committee for some reason, a dean's appointment as well. But yeah, absolutely include all of the committees that you're working on. Okay, I think we're just about out of time. One last question, anybody? Good to go? Any feedback for me in terms of other things that you were hoping we would talk about that we haven't? Okay, so you have Lelia's email and you know where I live if you have questions, so don't hesitate to be in touch. There will be a follow-up email for those who were unable to attend today. There'll be kind of a step-by-step instruction email that we will send out to them in the next couple of weeks. But once you get that, if there's anything confusing, I'd like to hear from you so that we can nip it in the bud. If it's confusing for you, it's confusing for other people too. So make sure we got our process right. Thank you for coming.